get a motion to approve it?
I so approve.
Okay, seconded and carried. And then the minutes of the last meeting have been circulated as well. Are there any comments on those minutes? If not, then I would ask for a motion to approve them as well.
Again, I so move.
Okay, and I would second, and then they are carried. Moving on to public comments. So this is where we invite people who have reviewed the material, and there has been some emails going around. So to give us some very brief comments on things you would like to see addressed.
Sure, I'll jump in. I'm a little bit confused about some of the financials. I know they're kind of pro forma, but there's the timing of this. I'm not sure why we need to do this whole shoot match right now. I mean, you've got $1.6 million worth of capital improvements shown there. So that's, do you want to just take these one at a time, or do you want me to just kind of go through some of my?
Well, Dennis, maybe just, because obviously we're going to go through the meeting, and I suspect there will be discussion when we get to the individual points anyway. So I think, what I heard is your concern, and perhaps I share it too, is the proposed budget and the 5-year spending plan, I think, came as a surprise to you and perhaps to Patricia and myself as well.
Yes.
So we would, as we get into the meeting, we'd ask the staff to give us some background, which they will anyway, as to how this has been arrived at. I presume it's just a draft, which council at some later date would consider anyway.
Well, maybe it would make more sense to let you go through your presentations of all this, and then we can ask questions. Maybe you'll answer the questions along the way.
Yeah. Now, anyone else have some comments at this point? Okay, well, hearing none, then sure. Why don't we get on with the agenda as presented by staff?
Excuse me, can you hear me?
Yes, hi, Jim.
I have to leave sharply at 4, just as a point of information.
Okay. We're moving along sharply then. Thank you. So Patrick, I think you're on next.
Okay. So in terms, we have on the agenda here, Vancouver Coastal Health Annual Report. I assume
I believe that was left off the community information meeting. So all the other water districts received the report then.
Oh, okay.
So it's, I don't know if there needs to be discussion, but just to ensure that this group has access to that information.
Okay. I mean, generally the water quality is good. There were some metals in a couple of samples at Bowen Bay well number 3 that had levels exceeding guidelines that were needing to investigate. So we've started the process of looking at options and concept designs for water system improvements in various municipal water systems, including Bowen Bay. So we'll be looking more closely at whether additional water treatment is needed as part of that, or if it's question of sampling procedure that resulted in these elevated levels. So I don't know if there's anything in particular you wanted me to address relating to the VCH report.
Maybe now that the committee members have seen it, do they have questions about it?
I drink it and I'm alive.
Yeah.
Good. Good.
Yeah, although you
Um,
put anesthetic in it, Jim, don't you?
And for anesthetic.
Okay, I'm fine with it. Anyone else have a question on it?
No, okay.
Okay, well then why don't we move on to the next item, Patrick?
Okay. So a number of initiatives from this past year and earlier in the year, we started an aquifer monitoring program in April. We've just gotten a draft assessment report from the consultant EXP, who was carrying out that study, looking at monitoring across Blue Water, King Edward Bay, Bowen Bay, as well as a private well. We'll be making that information available once we finalize the report. Generally, it's showing that the aquifer is a reliable source for long-term sustainable source for all of these systems, and can accommodate some of the development that's being proposed. The Bowen Bay wells are the most productive across the systems, and probably due to the wells being lower down in the aquifer. And there's opportunity to optimize, to improve the water supply from those wells. So we'll be looking at those recommendations, as well as other water system improvements. And there was a request for proposals earlier this year that was laying out a number of consultant services we need to look at water system improvement projects across the island, including the west side systems and Bowen Bay. And we've hired Urban Systems to help us with that work. And that the first phase of that project, looking at analysis of options and conceptual design and cost estimates, is underway. And Glenn is the project manager. He's here to answer some questions and provide perspective on that as needed. There was some comments made about numbers in the capital budget. We really expect to have much better sense of what the costs are likely to be early next year, once we've gone through the first phase of this water system improvements design project. They were really just based on an assumption about gradually replacing undersized water mains over a number of years to improve service and improve reliability of fire protection. And as part of the ongoing capital renewal and replacement. It may be that those costs are pushed out into later years as we get better information about our assets and the age of them and when the expected replacement needs are likely to be, and aligning that with our desires for upgraded infrastructure. So just a bit of perspective on the cost estimates. They're very much high level estimates at this point. Well, I'll pause there. If there's any questions relating to the aquifer study or the water system improvements project, we can.
Okay, one question. What do you mean by high level estimates?
Well, it was really just looking at, we want to replace a total of 1.2 kilometers of main over time, applying a unit rate to that and spreading it out over a 5-year period. You know, it may be that the desire is to push that work out into later years, and you know, not incur those costs in the 5-year, or the same kind of cost in the 5-year time horizon. But we haven't done we haven't gone through our detailed you know, analysis of the water supply, storage, and distribution needs for all of the 3 water systems that are, you know, linked together here on this aquifer, and the options for best meeting everybody's needs are. So that's what I mean, high level, before we've gone through that process.
Thank you.
Do you want comments from the public at this point, or do you want us to stay out of it?
No, comments are good.
Okay. My comment would be, I just question the value of spending a lot of money for increased fire protection on the island. We have a volunteer fire department, and I think it's fairly well accepted knowledge that, or belief, if you will, that if your house catches on fire, the best thing our volunteer fire department can do is save your neighbor's house. So I personally wouldn't support spending a lot of money for increased fire protection per se.
Okay. If I could ask a question about the aquifer part first. In the study, did you get a sense that there is all the water systems on Bowen are drawing from the same aquifer, or are there a number of smaller aquifers that, say, one on the west side, one in other areas?
There are separate aquifers, and it seems like, yeah, Bowen Bay and King Edward Bay and Blue Water are all connected at some level to the same aquifer, and Tunstall Bay is, you know, a separate aquifer. Within that, there's zones of influence for each of the wells that, you know, so a well pumping more in Bowen Bay isn't necessarily going to affect a well over in Blue Water.
Okay. Yeah, because I guess, of course, it always comes up is the various systems are arguing they don't really want to share the water that's brought up and interconnect, etc. But I guess I was just trying to investigate if we're in a sense, we're all pulling from the same aquifer, then it's just a question of one system has a more efficient way of pulling the water. But as you suggested, there may be local influences so that indeed the Bowen Bay one is pulling from a better part or a better section of the aquifer and has a more reliable draw. Okay, and then the water main replacement item, which we did discuss quite a bit at last year's meeting. And I think at the sense of last year's meeting was, you know, we did want to look at, you know, eventual plan to replace the water main, mainly because it was felt that it was 40 some odd years old. And also, of course, it didn't meet the requirements for 6-inch fire hydrants. And of course, it didn't also up above have the sufficient storage to supply 6-inch hydrants. And I guess what we need to do is maybe get a better understanding, because I've talked to a couple of the committee members already about the fact that when do pipes, you know, and of course you're going to be doing some sort of study to establish when all the pipes actually should be replaced in the various parts of the island. But I think our pipes were probably put in the 60s and 70s, and they were put 70s. in the 70s by a private developer. So I guess it's a question of finding out if the pipes themselves have been assessed during the flushing process, and if it's felt that the pipes had another 5 years or another 15 years.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's likely there's, more than 5 years, probably closer to 15 years or maybe even more. We need to get a better understanding of the age, capital replacement, and expected time frame that assets need to be replaced in, and from there develop a a lot more of a long range, like a 30-year plus capital plan for our assets. And that's part of the asset management plan that the municipality is working on. And it's related to the water system improvement projects that we're advancing. It may be that we're looking at a scenario where we're addressing the more immediate needs of limited storage, and perhaps there's some sections of water main that we determine to be high risk of failure that we move forward with replacing, and that a lot of the buried infrastructure replacement can be deferred.
Right. And I'm suspecting, as we found out, with the blue water, I guess some of the pipe issue was actually the stability of the road, I think. But I suppose a lot of the Bowen Bay Road is founded on pretty good material, except for maybe where it crosses some of the creeks. And so really, I guess, what we would look forward to is, before we commit to a 5-year plan with significant monies, and because we also, I think last year talked about, the various ways of raising money. And of course, we have to get all 60 homeowners on board with the notion of spending this money. And of course, in order to get them to see spending it, they have to see the need. So I think, as you're sort of suggesting right now, you've got placeholders in the 5-year plan for potential replacement, but that plan really isn't, in fact, going to go to council this year for approval. Is that correct?
Well, it sounds like it might be premature to put that kind of spending commitment forward in a 5-year plan.
Yeah.
If I can just add to that, you're not committing to the amounts that are in the future years. However, if there is a possibility or potential that you're going to incur those costs, it would be more informative to people in the area of what the potential costs coming up in the next 5 years will be. So it's a double-edged sword. You could either not include them and people would think, oh, there's nothing coming up. There's nothing in the 5-year financial plan. We're not going to have challenges. Whereas if you do include them, then you can recognize that basically this may be required in the next 5 years, and you can take a look at the overall picture in terms of what your reserve balances are, what you're putting into reserve, and get a better picture of the situation, so to speak.
Okay, I guess, yes, we can get into that, but certainly what I've heard from a few of the residents is they're not overly keen to start banking the money and see significant increases when we don't actually have a timeline of when we need to change the pipes. I think because of course we've got these two issues. One is the undersize issue, and then the other is the pipe failing issue. And it sounds like the pipe failing issue is a longer term thing. And really the small pipe size has been an issue since
Day one.
Since day one. But I guess, and the other thing actually, while we're just talking about that budget, is in there also was a water, quite a large item for replacement of water meters.
Right.
And I know last year.
We're just going to be reviewing the budget in detail,
Okay.
like a screen share. That might be.
Sure. Are we at that point now? Perhaps we should say we've finished this part of the item, because when are you actually, if Raj is presenting the budget, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
With Patrick's help.
Yeah, but I guess I just wanted to finish up because last year we briefly touched on the notion of different kinds of water meters, but I think there was a sense we didn't need to rush out and replace them. I mean, it's a huge amount of money to reduce water meter reading costs. And of course, you're digging up the road and whatnot to get at and put these meters in. So we certainly last year, I don't think we gave any sense that we wanted to spend money on water meter replacements. Now,
I think the budget provision is, we'll get to that as a general one to cover, it may be other equipment or water main repair and replacement that,
okay.
that is required during the year that we want to have a provision for.
Okay. Okay, any other questions or discussion then on items 4.3?
Okay.
Okay, then why don't we move on then to number 5, finance.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen here. Bear with me for just a moment as I do that. So we're talking about the Bowen Island 2021 to 2025 financial plan for Bowen Bay. And essentially the objective of the financial part of the discussion is to explain the pressures for 2021 and provide the local area committee with information proposed to be included in the 5-year financial plan for both the operating plan and the capital plan, and for the LAC to make a recommendation to council based on the information received. So in terms of a little bit about the operating budget, the expenses of the water system must be supported by the revenues collected from the system. So essentially expenditures are supported by the revenues. You have to have a balanced budget, and the expenditure provisions within each water system consist of administrative costs and direct costs. And the administrative costs included in the budget schedule you'll see in a minute are comprised of administrative salaries and benefits, portion of administrative salary and benefits that are allocated, municipal liability insurance that's allocated, audit fees, IT support costs, and municipal hall rent and office supplies and postage. So an allocation is made for costs that represent, in your case, Bowen Bay's share of those costs. In terms of the direct costs, you're looking at the operating wages of essentially our utilities operators and utility staff, the supplies and services costs for the system itself, any contract services that are incurred directly in connection with the system, any property insurance attributable to specific water system, and maintenance of infrastructure and equipment, and utilities, electric, essentially hydro costs, if applicable. Now, in terms of the 2021 operating budget, the schedule that you would receive, the significant increases there were the contribution to the capital reserve. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that when we get to the capital schedule. And there is the salary and benefit provision is going up by about $1,900. So in order to be able to increase the contribution to the capital reserve by about $7,500 and to address the increase in the salaries and benefits budget, an increase of approximately 20% would be required in 2021. And the 5-year financial plan is built in approximately 15% per year increases in the outer years, almost all of which goes to the reserve for capital improvements. Reason these are being implemented is the reserve balance is relatively light in comparison to the upcoming capital financing needs of the water system. And you'll see that in a subsequent slide. So what we have here is a 2021 to 2025 draft budget, which reflects the increases I had talked about earlier. So we're seeing the projected revenue required to make the contribution to reserves and meet the expenditure as anticipated in the budget from 2020 to 2021, going from 48,600 to 58,500. Are there any questions on the operating budget and information that I shared with you before we move on to the capital budget slides?
I have a question, and perhaps Patricia North might remember as well. I mean, in theory, we're operating a water system, but at some point, I guess the cost of running the municipal hall and the space for the people has been factored into the various budgets. I mean, I presume municipal insurance, the rates you pay is probably the same whether you have a water system or not. But is it allocated as the extra cost of having the water system insured, or is it just an asset calculation to say, okay, we're plugging this much towards insurance? I mean, I presume all the other water boards have asked this question, and I presume this practice has been ongoing for some time. But what do you, or is there some, Raj, can you recall the history of the switchover, or Patricia?
No, I can't. No.
So what I can share with you is that if we go back to basically the administrative costs that are allocated, essentially, if you didn't have the water, some of these administrative costs probably wouldn't necessarily be, or how can I say this to explain this clearly? We probably wouldn't incur as much in administrative costs if we weren't managing the water systems. So there is effort on my part, on part of other staff's part, in addressing issues for the water system. So as a result, we allocate a proportion of salary costs for specific individuals who work on the water systems. What I can tell you is the allocation made is fairly light in some areas in comparison to the effort spent. So for example, I'm just going to give you an example. 10% of my salary goes to all water systems and then gets split up. I bet you 40% of my effort is spent on work for the water systems. 25% of Patrick's salary is allocated to water utilities. And I would venture to say that probably 40% of his effort goes towards addressing issues in the water system. So it may be something we need to look at in the future. I've continued on with the allocations that were being made, but essentially the allocation of these administrative costs is based on essentially the effort spent on the water systems. To answer your question, would these costs be incurred if the water systems didn't exist? Some would, some wouldn't. I can't direct, I mean, essentially our liability insurance premiums are based on the risk. There is a risk factor that goes into establishing the rates, and managing water systems has a higher risk associated with it. So we are paying a higher liability premium as a result of the municipality taking on water systems. I mean, the liability for those systems. Yeah.
That was pretty scary what you just said, that right now you're allocating about 10% of your costs to the water systems, but you're actually thinking that you're spending 40% of your time on water systems. Is that what you said?
Well, probably, I mean, I haven't measured my hours, but when it comes, as I've been working on the budget process for this year, I've probably spent a lot more time on the effort put into putting all the information together and consultation that goes on with each of the water systems than I do on our general fund.
So therefore, what you're actually telling us right now is that we're looking forward in the next couple of years, the administrative costs of our water system is going to skyrocket by
Exactly.
400%.
What I'm telling you is that I don't believe, from myself personally, I don't believe that the allocation, the administrative allocation is reflective of the effort spent on taking care of water systems. And however, it's not an exercise that we've gone through. I'm just intuitively sharing that with you.
Yeah.
Not an exercise that we've gone through and looking at, or it's not a discussion that has been had at the municipal hall about increasing the administrative allocation at this
But
point.
essentially, it's in your mind now, so it become an issue.
Well,
Not even.
Yeah, I mean, I suspect this year, because some of the water systems have been having problems, and there's the plebiscite and the various upgrades going on. Yes, a lot of staff time is devoted to it, and it probably will continue, because once you resolve one area's water system, another one starts to have problems. And it's just, I guess, well, we're not going to change it, but certainly the notion of having the individual water boards is probably adds a lot of cost. If you were, if you're starting to say, oh, I have to allocate 40%, then you have to say to people, well, part of the reason I'm allocating 40% of my time is because we've got this system of individual water boards versus one uniform system for the whole island. I mean, the roads aren't all split up, and there's not a huge discussion for upgrading a road in a particular area like there is for upgrading water. But anyway, we're not going to solve that. That's just
Well,
part
I think we could solve some of that right now, because what I'm hearing, and one of the reasons I'm getting off this LAC, is you actually don't have any real input. People listen and dance, but you're actually wasting everybody's time, because the community's going to do what they want to do with or without our input. And so we're actually costing ourselves more money by being on this LAC than being off it.
Are there any other comments?
Yeah, I have a question. You're showing, these 15+% increases of transfers to reserves and surplus, which culminates at, looks to me like $1,700 a year for our water rate by 2025. Is that correct?
Sorry, can you repeat that last part again?
Sorry, I'm saying you're showing this annual substantial increase of 15% or so per year compounded to surplus and reserves, which
Actually, it's all to the reserve for capital works.
Yeah, and so, but that is reflected in the utility rates going up to where you're bringing
Exactly.
in $102,400 in 2025, which is about, if it's 60 properties, that's roughly $1,700 a year for our water rate. Is that correct?
It would essentially, it's pretty close to correct. Yes. I mean, if you were taking a look at your water rate, oops, sorry, I'm just going to. So the 20% increase, for example, for 2021, based on the same number of users, fixed rate for 2020 is approximately $780 a year. So a 20% increase would take that rate to about $960 roughly. And you could do the math by compounding that on an annual basis to see what the rate would be in 2025. Those rates would
it's compounding at a very high rate.
$3,000 and divide it by 60, you're at $1,700 a year.
But I guess if we think about it in today's dollars, we know that at some point we're going to be spending about $1.5 million to upgrade the system, whether it's in 5 years or 20 years. And I think I guess what we have to ask ourselves is we're building the reserve in the next 5 years by about $200,000 against a $1.5 million cost. So the question is, do we have this, this rolling increase every year of 15%, which is unusual. Like most tax, certainly council's going to be wrestling with the overall budget for the island, and certainly they're not going to be talking about this magnitude of increases year on year. So it's really a question of the water boards and for the public to sort of comment, okay, do we want to put away a little every year to, take a $1.5 million, well, actually, of course, it's future dollars. It's probably going to be $3 million pain down to $2.8 million. And really, it's probably a lot of hassle now for not a really dealing with the issue, which is going to have to be dealt with later.
Well, that's not my point. My point is, that pales in comparison to the 1.6 million bucks we're talking about. So where's the rest come from, and where did these numbers come from? It looks like it's just something pulled out of the air. It doesn't map into.
Oh, actually, why don't we take a look? It's essentially based on what your current reserve balance is and the buildup of your reserve balance. So maybe I'll go to the next slide, because that kind of leads into the increase to the contribution to surplus and reserves, and it might provide you a little bit of context. So in terms of the capital budget here, I'm going to talk about this at a high level, and then when we get into a discussion of the individual items, I'll call on Patrick to talk about the provisions that are included in the capital plan and proposed. But essentially what you can see is your estimated opening reserve balance for 2021 is $85,600. Over the next 5 years, you're looking at about $1.7 million in required capital works. The reserve balance is not sufficient to support that level of expenditures. So, I mean, you do have to defer works, or you have to take a look at alternative alternative ways of financing the work that is required. Now, your water system, based on the information that I have, has an estimated infrastructure replacement value of 1.2. And as many of you have, I mean, most of that estimated, sorry, I've got the wrong, no, yeah, 1.2. And essentially, I think I've got the wrong numbers. I've got the numbers from another system for the breakdown, sorry. So essentially, most of that value is in the linear infrastructure in the case of Bowen Bays. If I'm not mistaken, when I was looking at the numbers, about 800,000 of the 1.2 million was in your linear infrastructure, which everybody has talked about will need to be replaced over the next little bit. I don't think 85,600 is by far way too low an amount of money to be able to service that. So the 20% that was chosen, coming back to your early comment that it was a number picked out of the air, has kind of balanced. You probably need much bigger increases than that in order to increase the reserve balance to fund this expenditure. However, we've limited it to 20% in 2021 and 15% in outer years to balance a sustainable increase with the requirement to increase funding to your reserves.
Well, that's exactly my point. This is, that increase is inadequate.
It is inadequate, yeah. I can't argue with that. It's inadequate, but it's also been set at a level that I don't really want to say people can afford, but because but it's set at an not astounding level in comparison to what's, we've tried to strike a balance is what I'm trying to say.
But where I was heading is, where does the rest of it come from? Is it going to be an assessment? Or is it going to be, are you going to be able to procure a grant, or would it be a loan? I mean, there's a big shortfall there.
Yeah.
Where's that coming from?
And I don't have the answers to where it's coming from at this point in time.
Okay, but I think we did talk earlier, really, the linear part only needs replacement for, the fact that the lines can't serve 6-inch fire hydrant. But otherwise, I think Patrick had sort of implied earlier that maybe the actual lines themselves could last 15 years or more before they need replacing. So it's really, I think, a question of priorities. And it sounds like, people aren't upset that they don't have 6-inch hydrants. Right? I don't get the sense to talk to people, in fact, most people don't even understand the difference between the standpipes we have and a proper 6-inch fire hydrant. And so unless the fire department gets involved or someone else gets involved to make people understand there's an issue with 6-inch hydrants versus standpipes, then I don't see the need to replace the line for another 15 years. And so we don't need this big expenditure in a 5-year plan.
15 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
And the other question, I guess the other thing too, well, Dennis had asked the question, there's a $400,000 line item showing in each one. And so the answer is we don't know where that money might come from, whether it's a plebiscite or a loan, however it's done. That has to still be, that's the elephant in the room. And so my feeling is unless there's a method to deal with the elephant in the room, there's no point in, having a 15% increase because it's really only collecting a tiny bit of money to address something that when it is dealt with in 15 years is going to be a far larger dollar item.
Well said.
Would be
I hear all your
irresponsible.
comments, and I understand where you're coming from. And to the point that this community would have no problem belling up to the bar if the system failed. I think I'm correct in stating that fact.
Yes, no,
I think my position on that would be, it would not be financially responsible not to increase your contribution to reserve. Ultimately, it's your prerogative to recommend anything you'd like to council, but your 80,500, for example, if you had a water main break and you required a repair, I don't even know what it would cost, but you would eat through most of that 85,600 pretty quickly if an emergency water break needs to be.
I think it would be much more reasonable to make a plan that so we can mitigate whatever cost there might be down the road if there is a failure, which there will be, by starting off and putting a line in from our current wells down to the Y. So we put in the first little bit, and it's not a lot of hookups, so it's a lot easier to deal with, not a lot of road stuff to deal with. And then we're in a position that we have a good line to possible lines that will fail. But we've got the start. That's my thought. Everybody understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, but Jim, I guess the question is, the cost of administering and tendering and doing all the design work, etc., for doing a little bit of a time may be more painful than just doing the whole thing all at once. One of the things, of course, we get caught with is, you do one piece of the line and then you're about to do the next piece 5 years later and engineering standards change or something like that. And so, suddenly you're looking at a piece you've already done. My sense is that we're not hearing there's a problem with any part of our water lines, our pipes. So until there's a problem, we don't need to start planning to replace them. But the other thing Raj is saying, though, is if we do have one pipe break somewhere, which can happen at any time, he's feeling that 85,000 is not enough to do a repair. What do you think, Patrick? If there is a patch to a pipe, is 85,000 enough to do one
Can
repair?
I say something to address this issue right now?
Yeah.
We had a breakage here last 15 years along Arbutus Point Road, and it was like $1,000, $2,000 item. Right? It's not a breakage in the line to Pat's line is not an $85,000 job.
Not necessarily, no.
But
But
that's just a Band-Aid solution.
yeah, that's just a patch. So I mean, for example, the water main that had to be repaired in Blue Water last year, it wasn't just a repair, it was a section of about 80 meters of water main that had to be replaced, and that was, in the order of 70,000.
But there was also road costs to that too, wasn't there?
Yeah, and there was related costs to relating to the road as well.
Now, Jim, of course, in that one, there's an argument, did the slip of the road cause the pipe to fail or vice versa? But I don't think, what we're hearing is if they did all that for 70,000 just on the pipe side, then, really on the Bowen Bay system, we might have an isolated leak, which is going to be repaired for far less than $80,000. We don't know of any sections that are dicey, do we?
No.
It's just a relatively, it's a low number to be having in a capital reserve for, I don't know if the 1.2 is the right number, but a substantial value of infrastructure. It's better practice to have a reserve that gives you capacity to respond to needs without, every time if there's something major that happens, you have an ability to respond, and you don't have to go to some sort of financing arrangement and getting approval of the connected properties and delays that might be associated with that. And it's and I think what we want to do, and the item here that the GIS-based asset register, I mean, that's moving the asset management planning forward so that we actually have a database of the assets with an estimated remaining service life and what their replacement value is, and you map that out over your 30-year time frame or whatever we're choosing, and then you can, if you look at that on an annual basis, it's probably going to see that $85,000 is low when you look at your long range capital replacement needs.
Okay.
That really is the way to go. When
Can you just come back to just that 1.2 million? That is the Bowen Bay infrastructure estimated replacement value, with most of that being in the water mains and service connection area. So that 1.2 is based on approximately a calculated value of 854,000 for the replacement of water mains and service connections. And
the other point is that we haven't really talked about reservoirs. The reservoir capacity is low in Bowen Bay for the size of the system, and certainly much lower than what you would need to deal with a house fire if that were to occur. So
that one is an improvement one could do now or in the next 5 years that would give a benefit, which is increased fire safety. And Dennis, your point is how much water do we need? But I guess all of us are also, of course, thinking about forest firefighting, which I mentioned last year. And yes, they do try and pull water from elsewhere, but they're looking for water for any source when there is a forest fire. And if it's up above us or coming down the ravine, I think having water capacity, it is valuable. But I guess that's a second issue. There's this concept right now. Is $85,000 enough to have as a reserve? How does this compare to the other water system?
And not to put it another way, what is a best practice, Patrick, for a water system our size in terms of, is there a guideline now?
Well, there was a guideline that Raj referred to earlier. I think you referred to it earlier, which is, if you just built a new system and you're looking at building up a reserve to eventually deal with the ongoing replacement needs of that system over time, that you'd be putting aside about 1% of the asset value per year. So if we were to look at, this is obviously not a new system, it's older, so that advances the timeline for replacement. But even that, our contributions are lower than that. If we went back to the operations budget, I think we'd see that. But that's just a general guideline. It's not based on a detailed assessment of the assets and their ages and the 30-year plan for capital replacement, which is what we need. And that's what you want to base these reserve contributions and balances on.
So for example,
that management plan is really going to be key to having a better idea of what we really need to put into reserves every year. And when is that going to be done?
It's probably another 2-year effort to really have that. Certain parts of it are going to be done earlier than others, and that's driven in part by where there's major issues that we have to sort out. And there are major issues in Blue Water and in Eagle Cliff, and so those systems were spending more time looking at the condition and state of the assets. That we are also looking at the other West Side systems as well. So I expect that this coming year we'll make a lot of progress on understanding the asset management picture.
Sorry, I have to leave now. Thank you very much. Appreciate you making time.
Thank you, Jim.
That information, the asset, that information of knowing when this will have to be replaced, doing that assessment is the key information I'd be looking for, because if it's 15 years down the road, we can plan for it better than if it's 5 years. So that to me is the key thing to create the critical path for planning towards that replacement. So if we can prioritize that in any way possible, otherwise it could be a hit that really hurts people and creates other issues, right?
Well, I guess right now we're being asked to approve this idea of 10 and 15% increases, effectively doubling our annual rate or over doubling it in the next 5 years. And I get, having talked to some neighbors and in the sense of the committee, I think we feel that that's a little aggressive. And yes, it does need to be increased, but really whether it's 8% a year or 15% a year, of course, it's not dealing with the big elephant, which is the large expenditure at a later date. And certainly, there's debate, but really, if we have 1 or 2 water leaks in the next 2 years, it sounds like $85,000 can deal with those water leaks. If we have, because I guess we don't get, I'm not getting the sense that, we have the potential of the type of failure they saw at Blue Water, which was a very large failure. And, well, you probably know better than I what the actual cause was, but it was more than to do with water, I suspect. So I don't know whether the committee, Patricia, what do you think? Do we?
Well, short of actually having something catastrophic like an earthquake, and considering where we are with COVID at the moment, you never know what kind of catastrophe may be down the road. But in normal, the normal course of events, it does seem that that's we might be able to get by with doing more like 10 or 12% rather than 15% as on an annual basis. Is compounding does become pretty onerous. That's my feeling about it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anybody else? Okay. And then the other item is, we're not comfortable with seeing a $400,000 line item be carried in the budget because there's no place for the money to come from. So it doesn't make sense to me to show it in a capital budget plan of 400,000 when, there's no place, there's no source for the money. So maybe we have to approve a shorter plan until such time as we actually have a timeline
there are some.
A timeline as to when we're going to actually replace do the $1.2 million work or not. I mean, I think that the Bowen Bay Water Committee has concluded that there's no need to replace the system in the next 5 years.
Okay.
So we don't see the need to carry the $400,000 a year.
We could take that line out. We have the sort of the water system improvements assessment and design piece in the budget for this year and next that will provide a lot better information on what those actual requirements are in the 5-year plan.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to flag that there are some substantial expenditures out there in the future. And you're right, there may not be this much in the 5-year time horizon.
Then what about the water meter upgrades? Like maybe I misread it. Is the 400,000 for the entire island, or is that just for Bowen Bay? It says
No, residential water meter upgrades. That's an island-wide project.
Oh, okay.
That really the intent would be to move from a system of water meters that are manually read by operation staff to remotely read meters that don't require that driving to every property and doing that, which would reduce operations costs and also provide a lot better information on an ongoing basis to help identify leaks and better operate the water systems. So that's looking at the concept design and business case around that, as a $20,000 cost for next year, and then replacing the meters in the subsequent year. And those numbers in there are, the prorated based on number of connections share of to the Bowen Bay system.
So that's about $330 a meter. Can we actually change it to a meter that has a remote? Like, you still have to come and tap the meter, don't you?
No.
Or are you going to go to the cell phone type of meter?
That would be the idea, that it's remote telemetry that can read these meters.
You can do that for $300 a pop.
Well, I'm not sure. I mean,
no,
that sounds optimistic.
Yeah, because you need power and you need, there's all sorts of infrastructure. I think some of them, they generate power as the water flows, and that's how some of them work. But of course, we have some meters with very low flows.
Mhm.
So I think, I mean, again, yes, if we can, eliminate staff time and see our share of staff costs dropping, I'd say get into it, but I suspect it's not going to be a straightforward item.
Maybe not. And actually, this was put in the budget in the last year. And we had a lot of issues, more pressing issues to deal with, and we hadn't made any headway on it. So
Okay.
it's really carried forward another year. And we may get into looking at the business case and decide that it's not a priority, and that it doesn't make the financial sense, and it gets put aside. That's a possible outcome.
So, but anyway, the budget we're approving for 2021 then is $1,000 for that item.
Yeah.
That's for the pre-study.
Over our 60 meters. So
Business case, yeah.
I mean, that may not be spent then if you don't do that work.
Any work that we don't end up doing gets put back into reserves.
Patrick, it's Allison. But that $1,000, as I understand it from the other meetings, that's to their pro rata share of doing the work to decide whether it's worthwhile changing the meters.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay, well, I mean, I suspect you'll do a 2-level. There's a pretty high level look at it, the feasibility, which won't cost a lot. And then if you get into actually detailed design, then you're going to be more like the 1,000. Well, probably more actually.
Probably more.
Yeah. So anyway, I guess the Bowen Bay Water Committee, I'd say the consensus is that we would not support the resolution as presented. That we would like to see.
Can I share my
budget
screen,
amended.
John? And
Yes.
get the Rush
Oh, yeah, I'll unshare mine.
details of the resolution on the screen for people to
Certainly.
see. Sorry to interrupt. Is that okay, John?
Yep, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can everyone see?
So I think it's our feeling of the committee, and maybe you just put it in the context of an increase, is that we could support perhaps an increase of 10% a year.
Oh, for the rates?
For the increasing the water rate year over year.
Annual.
That's inflation plus 8%.
Year. And not the proposed, sorry, was it 20%?
Well, 20% for the first year, and then 10% for succeeding year, and 15% for succeeding years.
Yeah.
So why don't you just make it simple, Steph, and say that the annual water rate's not increased by any more than 10% a year?
That would be good.
And then take out the last,
Period. Just period. And then capital budget, I agree to remove allocations for water main upgrades.
Just taking out that number.
Wouldn't
No,
use
just
the
the
word
motion.
allocation.
The amendment would be the amendment to the capital budget would remove the $400,000 allocations for water meter upgrades, water main.
Oh,
upgrades.
it's water system improvements in the budget description.
Okay, so for water system improvements.
Sorry.
Actually, no, it's called the Bowen Bay Distribution Water Main Upgrades.
I'm looking at your capital budget, Raj, and the
Yeah,
water line. for
In the
400.
capital
That's
budget, Allison, the $400,000 item is Bowen Bay Distribution Water Main Upgrades.
Oh, I've got an old printout then. Is what I'm looking at.
Oh. Maybe I've got an old printout, sorry.
There were a number of them
What's in our agenda package, it's labeled water system improvements.
Okay, yeah, just remove the outer years provision, move, yeah. It's not an.
That's water system.
What I'm gonna say is it's not an allocation.
It's
It's an actual direct expenditure. So remove
Remove the
$400,000 capital expenditure in years 2022 to 2025.
Take out allocations. And then say for the Bowen Bay water system improvements.
Yeah. I've got the older version on my screen. My apologies for that, Allison.
Oh, that's okay.
That's it. That's all we're worried about.
Okay.
Everybody happy with the other lines?
Yeah, I think, what does the rest of the committee think? Are we happy with all the other line items? Maybe we could just jump them on the screen again quickly.
Okay.
Raj?
Raj, you want to go back to your screen?
Sure.
I just wanted to throw out one question while you're looking for the capital budget. Has anybody inquired of their insurance agent what their insurance premium would be if you were rated a 3A system instead of a 5 for fire and underwriters purposes?
Allison, it's a very difficult question. And probably we don't want to discuss it in a public forum.
Okay.
What do you think? I forget.
So you wanted me to come back to this slide here?
Yeah. So I think, yeah. So I think we're happy with these items for 2021. Obviously, the other ones were reviewed year on year later.
I think it would be useful to show on your budget spreadsheet, Raj, how much money's being transferred in and where that leaves the balance. You're just showing the expense side.
That's a very good point. And that question, that issue had come up at a previous LAC meeting. So in producing the budget book, I will include a 5-year projection of the capital reserve balances.
Okay. Okay. But otherwise, yes, I think the committee can accept the rest of the line items.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so do you want to read that out and vote on it? I'll share it again.
Sure.
Just, get out of there, Raj.
Okay.
Thank you. It seems a little litigious. I'm just trying to be really careful about these things. There you go. Does a committee member want to read that out loud to start the vote?
No. Yeah, no, I think, Patricia, do you want to move that this?
I so move.
And I would second it. Allison, do you have what would be the vote? I would vote in favor.
It's only you and Patricia who are voting right now. You have so much power.
Okay, then since we both moved and seconded, then yes.
And then you vote on top of yourself.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so voted.
Thank you.
I'm going to have to excuse myself. We've had a contractor walk in the door and he's got a little problem. So
okay.
I think we're at the
A
end.
water problem?
I'll leave the Zoom on just in case. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next is item 5.2.
I think that might have, sorry, go ahead, Patrick. I might have included that without getting full support from Patrick on that. Yeah, I don't know if he has a lot to report.
You're muted, Patrick.
Very eloquent.
I don't have much to say about grants. We're always looking for opportunities.
And I mean, I think last year, or actually it was interesting. I wrote a letter last year suggesting that we do spend some money, you know, to look at designing a system in case some Canada infrastructure grants became available. And a lot of them are based on who's ready to go and they get the money. But it's sounding like really we're with 15 years out, or 10 or 15 years is the horizon for replacing our pipes. Probably it doesn't make sense to do the design work now. We spend $200,000 or $300,000 on all the design and tendering work, etc. So, I mean, that would be the only thing under the grant section that I could think of for discussion was, you know, is there any potential to grab a grant if we were shovel ready? Yep, go ahead, Patrick.
Well, we did just apply for an infrastructure grant relating to the Eagle Cliff water system in October. And we're likely to see major needs in the relating to the blue water system that we'll be looking for grant opportunities. And we have to be, we can't apply for too many at once because it does, you know, they do look at where the money's gone. And if we're successful in getting money for one water system, it might limit our ability to apply for grants in the same year for another system.
Okay, no, I think that, so that answers my question. It's based on as we work through the various systems.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other comments on the grant section then?
Nope.
Okay, then moving on to correspondence and actions. So I think, so Patricia, do you have any other questions?
No, I think we've covered everything that I was after.
Yeah, and I would feel the same.
Always been on putting it in.
In terms of staff, is there any other things you know that might you can think of that might be coming up that might affect us in the next year or so?
Well, we are looking at, you know, in terms of the issues facing the West Side water systems. We've talked about yours being essentially low storage, lower than what you'd need, and undersized mains, and, you know, generally aging infrastructure. You know, Blue Water has those issues in addition to inadequate supply. And, you know, in looking at the bigger picture in terms of where there is good supply, there are, you know, you have one well in particular, Bowen Bay well number 1, has a sustainable yield of, you know, about 23 gallons per minute, which is substantial. So, you know, we are looking at the whole picture for the West Side water systems, and what the best solutions are to meet everybody's needs,
okay.
You know, provide that level of service then. So we want, in terms of how it would affect you, I mean, we would see that continued consultation with the affected water systems, the LACs of, you know, Bowen Bay, King Edward Bay, and Blue Water would be part of that process. So, you know, we'll sort out, that'll be early in 2021, where we'll have some information on options and cost estimates and preferred solutions. that we'll want feedback on.
So we'll probably have another meeting like we had last September at some point.
Yeah, whether it's a community meeting or an LAC meeting, I mean, something along those lines. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So if I can just add to that, yeah, I mean, the numbers that were provided in the 5-year financial plan are based on, like Patrick was saying, on the bigger picture and the long-term view. And so those rate increases that were included in the budget proposal were based on primarily trying to build up your reserve balance to where it should be. I just want to emphasize that point, that $85,600 in a reserve balance for a 55-year-old utility system of your size is nowhere near where your reserve balance should be. Your reserve balance should probably be at about 8 times that amount to address infrastructure replacement needs. So that is what the rate proposed rate increase was based on.
Okay, thank you. Anything else, Patricia?
Nope, nothing
No.
else.
And then anything from members of the public for item question period?
Hello. So we have
Okay. Anything else then? Hearing nothing, then I think we can, let's see, item 8, then notes from the September Bowen Bay Community Information Meeting. I think we've seen those. We've got the link there. So next meeting is to be determined, probably a year from now. And
No, I think Patrick was saying there might be something in the winter, spring.
okay, sure, fair enough.
Yeah.
You're right. Okay, then we can record that in the minutes that the next meeting might be sooner than that. And I think at this point we can adjourn.
Thank you very much, John.
Thanks.
Thank you, Raj, Patrick, and everybody.
Thank you, staff.
And
And
thank you
everyone.
as well.
for the
Have a good
hard work.
evening, everybody.
Yep, great. Okay.
Bye.
Thanks, John.